learning are revolutionizing the healthcare landscape, making it an opportune topic for discussion. AI-driven advancements are transforming diagnostics and personalized medicine, offering the potential for improved patient outcomes and increased efficiency. In recent years, there has been a surge in interest and investment in these technologies. By combining the latest research with practical applications, we can accelerate the development of groundbreaking healthcare solutions. Today's session is a collaboration between IIIT Hyderabad and ISB, where we'll be developing into transformative technologies and their implications for the future. Now, it is my pleasure to invite Professor Ramesh Loganathan, Head of Research Outreach and the curator of the Tech Forward series. Professor, please.
So good afternoon, good evening, and welcome to the second edition of the Tech Forward Research Seminar Series. I just take 1 or 2 minutes to introduce the series. The idea was that industry academia, the conversations are very, very few and far in between. ISB probably does more of it than most other institutions, especially on the science and engineering side. It's not very common at all. And so we wanted, Professor Jhunjhunwala is our new chairman. He took over in September. And one of the things he wanted was to intensify these conversations. So he's been pushing for ideas. And so among few other things, we came up with this research seminar series. And we said, let's do it as a city ecosystem event. So we have a small steering council. Professor Bhagwan Chaudhary is part of the council. Alok from Goldman Sachs is part of the council. We have a 7-member steering council from industry, one from ISB, Professor Bhagwan from ISB, and MSR from T-Hub, and then 5 other leaders from Microsoft, Google. We have Goldman Sachs and Bosch, right? We also want engineering angle in it. And so it's a 7-member steering council that curates the whole series, the structure. We've been working on it for the last few months. So we had the first edition last month. It was AI on the Edge. It was hosted at Qualcomm. And we said it will be no fixed venue. We will just go few in academic institutions. Of course, only 3 institutions are part of it right now, IIIT, ISB, and IIT. But most of it will be in industry. So that was the idea. We'll host it. And looking at mid to senior level leaders from the industry and academicians to be at each of the editions. We'll pick contemporary topics there's current interest in industry and still actively in research. That was the idea. And so this month's edition, this edition's topic is healthcare, computing science and healthcare. Today, of course, that by default translates to AI and healthcare, but we're hoping it's a little broader than that. AI is, of course, the hottest thing in town right now. And so we said 2 talks every month. We'll have 1 research talk and 1 industry talk. 2 talks, go a little deep, so not have too many other discussions, just 2 talks, and then maybe a short Q&A. But that should trigger conversations at the end of the talk. That's the whole idea. So the networking is the 3rd talk, right? 2 talks and networking. So those are the 3 main agenda items for every edition. And so we say we'll have a curator for each edition. We'll have a seminar chair who will kind of curate the edition. And so this month we have Professor Sarang as the chair. He will introduce the session in just a little bit. And we said to trigger the conversations, while the seminar is good, and we may have some people in the room, but there may be many others that would have interest in the topic. So we said we'll capture that in a dispatch, Tech Forward dispatch, a compilation of 6 features. 2 from the talks, the seminar chair's note, and 2 or 3 other invited features on the same topic. And we will just push that to the mailing list, and hopefully that leaves something to kind of refer to, look at, maybe forward, and then and there are contacts, reach out to somebody. And so the hope is the success of the series, while yes, there is some knowledge sharing that will happen at the seminars, but the actual success will be measured in terms of the number of conversations and actual engagement that happen post the seminars. So we hope it happens. A lot of people, like I said, the steering council has invested a lot of time in this in terms of thinking through this, the whole series. Thank you to the whole council. Bhagwan and Alok are here today. And thanks to ISB for hosting this edition, and the Max Institute, very appropriate base for this topic. So with that brief note, again, welcome to the series, and we're very happy that this is happening, and it's a collective cities initiative. We're just, some of us in steering council are helping anchor it. Otherwise, it's a cities collective effort. So thank you for being a part of it. And we'll now request Professor Sarang Deo to kind of set the context on the theme for today and get the talks going.
Hey, good evening, everyone. Welcome to ISB. Professor Ramesh has already talked about the Tech Forward series and the broader idea behind it. So I'll not repeat it. I'll just say it is very hard to have a dialogue between industry and academia. Okay, but it's not impossible. It's just difficult. And so once we understand each other's language, I think the ball gets rolling. What is this dialogue about? So, I tend to think of this as these dialogues can provide industry with early peek into new ideas, innovations that are happening in the academic world, and also provide academics with relevant and challenging problem statements that they can work on, right? That's sort of what comes to mind immediately. And it seems like a one-way street. It's like two lanes going in opposite direction. But I think it's much more nuanced than that, because in my experience, at times there is more cutting edge research going on in industry than the academic world that happens. And at times also academics with their fresh pair of eyes can provide solutions or identify problems that industry themselves cannot identify readily. So I think both can contribute to each other's role, although they are wearing a different hat. Before I go forward, just to get a sense of the audience here, which will help me and also help the speakers, how many of you identify yourself as coming from industry? Okay. How many of you are from academics? Okay, so I didn't see many people raising both hands. So, I mean, in case somewhere straddling. So I think it's half and half. For speakers, I'm giving this sense it's half and half. Now, there's a special question I have, which I think is pertinent only for healthcare subjects. So let me ask you this. Those who said they're from industry, how many are from healthcare industry? Healthcare industry. I think it's 10 people maybe. Okay, and how many are from industry but not from healthcare? Okay, I think it's important specifically for healthcare. So what I'm going to do is lay out maybe 4 or 5 observations that I have about the healthcare sector. I've worked in it for almost 2 decades now. And it is unique industry in many ways. It will also help set the stage for the speakers. Okay. So just very, very broad brush strokes of where healthcare is today, especially those who don't come from the healthcare sector. We've seen dramatic increases in life expectancy over the past century, right? All of us know this. India specifically at independence. What was the life expectancy of India? Average life expectancy at independence? Anyone? In 40s. Today we are close to 70 if you bar COVID. So that's dramatic increase, and that we've seen across many, many countries, right? But now we are reaching a plateau. And now healthcare costs are rising dramatically, and the life expectancy increases. We're not getting as much as we were getting earlier. And because we're going to talk about drug development later, we can take the example of oncology drugs. So some of the most recent oncology drugs that have been approved in developed markets, the incremental life expectancy of those drugs is a matter of weeks. Additional few weeks you can buy with those drugs. Okay, so you're really reaching a plateau. That's one sort of fact to keep in mind. Related fact, the major drivers for morbidity and mortality today no longer infectious diseases. Those we've conquered. So through basic cleanliness, hygiene, vaccines, antibiotics, those we've conquered. Now the next frontier is non-communicable diseases, right? Diabetes, hypertension, respiratory diseases. And if you think about this, the causes and therefore the solutions to these diseases will lie outside of the conventional boundaries of healthcare, right? Those could be lifestyle, social determinants of health, wellness as against healthcare. And so that also has some implications for all the technology enthusiasts. Which are your targets are going to be different depending on what the disease burden is. And here is the double whammy. Some of these diseases used to be called as the diseases of the rich. No longer the case. Even in low middle income countries, these are the main drivers of mortality, morbidity. Among low middle income countries, the lower income segments of the population are also bearing the brunt of these diseases. Okay, so the conventional wisdom that we have that, oh, these are rich people, they will have money to take care of these diseases, these are lifelong, problems, no longer the case, which has policy implications, technology implications, etc., etc. And so what's coming out is that cheap calories, sedentary lifestyle, poor air quality, no longer reserves of privileged few. It's affecting everyone. In fact, more so in the global south, as we call it, right? So that's the second main point I wanted to make. The third, which I have observed, my background is in operations management, so I deal with processes, right? While we today will talk about technology in healthcare, and healthcare is an important sector, it continues to be one of the least industrialized sectors in most economies. What I mean by least industrialized, many people would claim and take pride in the fact that healthcare is a craft, right? If you talk to doctors, are there doctors in the audience? I know some, but are there doctors? Can they? Yeah. So sometimes there is professional pride in saying we treat every patient differently. Is the difference of patient translating into appropriate difference in care is a separate question. But before we can use technology at scale, we got to create processes that are replicable. And healthcare today is not at that level. So when we say industry 4.0, certain things come to our mind, that there are processes set in place. Even when it comes to financial services, now that we've got Goldman representation here, the backend processes are fairly stable, replicable, repetitive. Then I can talk about rapid process automation, AI, so on and so forth. How does that translate into healthcare is a big question because of this craft nature. And despite so much improvement in technology, the core of healthcare delivery still tends to be predominantly one human, another human talking to each other across the table. Okay, so that's just the reality that we need to grapple with when we are thinking about technology. That's my third point. And the fourth point, which is kind of counterintuitive, is despite it being more of a craft, the production of new knowledge in healthcare, medical fields, lifestyles, life sciences, far outstrips the production of knowledge in many other industries. So think about this, right? The new knowledge that is getting generated is more and more. The rate of generation of knowledge is far more than other industries. Yet the mechanism by which that knowledge is getting translated into actual service delivery tends to be relatively archaic. Okay, so that's sort of the broader context in which technology play will happen. And that's why I'm laying out these bigger issues. And the last one, so all of these factors are, in my mind, translating into leakage of value. Because today we are talking about technology, innovation, that's where the source of the value is. But that value will be eventually realized in that interaction between the provider and the patient. And in my mind, there are a lot of leakages that will happen over a certain value chain. And the two main drivers for leakage of that value, one at the back end is data. So if you think about technology as predominantly the engine of algorithms or models, that's where we're going to use, let's say, AI, the back end of that, which is data. So while there is a lot of data in healthcare, a lot of that data is not readily amenable to these algorithms and models. One, because a lot of this data remains unstructured in notes, in images. A lot of it tends to not get collected at all because it's in the minds, in the brains of the two humans who are interacting with each other. So there's a lot of leakage that's happening at that end. And the other end where the leakage is happening is the output of an algorithm and the decision that a human is making. There tends to be a lot that gets lost in translation because humans who are implementing those recommendations either don't believe in those models or algorithms, right? And some of that is also because these AI models tend to be a lot of black box models. And so it's very hard to interpret what's going on underneath. And so there's that bad equilibrium that exists. And I'm saying this because at least in the business school where we are not generating new algorithms and models, some of the work that we do is to understand how humans could actually take the output of those models, algorithms, and implement them. So what are the behavioral challenges that exist there? Okay. So those to me are the five main points that I want you to keep in mind as we discuss technology and healthcare today. And with that broad background, I will now move on to introducing the speakers for today, both esteemed and highly accomplished speakers. Given that healthcare in equal parts is products and services, right? So I think it's opportune and it's appropriate that we pay equal attention to both of them. So we'll start with Professor Deva, who will talk about use of AI, technology, algorithms in computational drug discovery. So that's how those drugs get developed and eventually enter into the care delivery spectrum. And then after that, we'll have Dr. Sujoy Kar from Apollo, who will talk about how AI is getting used in healthcare delivery itself. And I'm sure he'll talk about not just the clinical interaction that I talked about between the provider and the patient, but also the paraphernalia, because I just don't enter a doctor's office directly and just get out of it cured. There's a lot of stuff that is happening. So when we talk about AI use cases there, it'll be a whole spectrum that we'll discuss. Now, it is also, I think, appropriate for Tech Forward series that we've got one academic speaker and another industry speaker. But please don't take those formal titles very seriously. Both have worn different hats at different points in time. Professor Deva interacts with industry very closely, so he's well versed with what's happening in the pharma sector. And on the flip side, Dr. Sujoy also teaches part-time in many education institutions. So he's worn the hat of an academic, okay? And that's really good, because for dialogue to happen, we need to be expert in our own domain, but also need to understand how the other party thinks, where do they come from. So I'm hoping that this will be the start of the dialogue. I'll stop here. I hope that all of you are looking forward to the talks as much as I am. So let me not stand in your way. And I hope that you find this event to be helpful to initiate those dialogues. But as Professor Ramesh said, there'll be more that hopefully comes after the event in terms of actual engagement. So welcome to ISB again, and thank you for being here. With that, I'll welcome Professor Deva to the stage to deliver his note. And after that, it'll be Dr. Sujoy. Thank you.
Yes. Right. So first of all, thank you, Sharang, for your nice note in the beginning. It helps set the context. And secondly, of course, thank you for having me in this. I think this is my first time in this campus. Very nice. And also Ramesh for pushing me into this kind of stuff. But I kind of get a little bit uncomfortable. But thanks to Ramesh, I've been doing this few times in the last few years. Okay, so in the next 30 minutes, what I will try to do is to give some flavor of how the modern artificial intelligence is used in drug discovery. And before that, I will set a context in terms of what we mean by drug discovery and what is the role of computations in the drug discovery, and then give some case studies at the end in terms of how it is being used, right? Okay, so of course, I also noticed that several of you are from healthcare, industry or hospitals and so on. We work, as Sarang mentioned, we work in close collaboration with multiple hospitals and many industries. Many of my colleagues, Dr. Vinod, Judish, and Dr. Maitri, all of them are here. It'll be nice to have a conversation in terms of how we could work together in any areas of healthcare, not necessarily in drug discovery. All right, so this is my outline. I'm just gonna spend maybe 10 minutes in each of these. What I'm gonna do initially is to tell something that is already known for several decades now. I'm just gonna talk about or just give you the story of one particular drug which I take here to be aspirin, and I'm going to use that to kind of tell or impress upon how the process of the discovery itself has evolved over different over time, right? And then second, quickly talk about the process itself, how it happens, and what is the role of computations, and finally the role of AI. All right, so this is aspirin, and I'm sure every one of us would have heard about this drug, and hence this example. And we also know that this is one of the most widely used drugs in the world, we are consuming about 100 billion pills or so every year, right? So, but this, let's just look at, how this drug came into the market and how we started, using it. So it is believed that some form of aspirin, of course, it did not have the name aspirin at that point, but some form of aspirin has been in use for 5,000 plus years, right? This is surprising, but this, at least we know that on record and written notes on using the, willow tree, the same tree that people use to make cricket bats these days, right? It's, the extract from willow tree is used for, inflammation, for example, right? So this is at least 2,500 years. This is really surprising, right? And at some point, people realize that, there is something in this, concoction, right? It's not like the concoction itself is active, but there is something in concoction which is helping us, right? And that was found to be, salicylic acid, much, later 19th century. And, of course, that has some side effects. For example, consumption of even aspirin these days, causes internal bleeding, and so on. And that's why we have that for, I use that as blood thinners and so on. And of course, this was modified. Salicylic acid was modified and made it into something else, which is much more, much safer, right? That's what about the 19th century, end of 19th century, right? And of course, like Dolo for COVID-19 is basically, aspirin for Spanish flu in 1918. Of course, later, much better drugs started coming, acetaminophen, Brufen, for example. And because of the side effects, people preferred these two over aspirin. But then, we started using aspirin as a blood thinner. Okay. And then what happened? And we started, trying to understand how aspirin works. Initially, we just started using something. And then we found out what is in that concoction that actually works. And then the next stage is to figure out how the aspirin works, right? So people started figuring out that this particular aspirin binds to some particular protein in your cells, because of which, there's some mechanism. Maybe I'll just flash it for 10 seconds, but we'll not go into, a lot of details today, right? Because of the diverse audience. But the idea is that we realized at some point that, we tried to ask why aspirin works the way it is doing, right? And that's how, we looked at this one. And then we also tried to figure out what are the side effects, why are the side effects and so on, right? And once we understand this, we started making better drugs. For example, Celebrex and Vioxx towards the end of the 20th century. And of course, they had some issues. We will not worry about them, right? But the idea is that, this aspirin or aspirin meaning NSAID in some sense, but, this has gone through some stage. Initially, we did not question much. We just, made a, syrup and drank and so on. And then we realized much more mechanisms. For example, in addition to it binding to one particular protein, which causes inflammation, which is what we want to treat, it also, binds to some other protein, which is, leading to gastrointestinal bleeding, for example, right? And then we looked at the protein structures, right? We look at the structure of the protein, how it looks like, how it binds. And then we figured out, where it binds. For example, this is the shape of the region of the protein where the molecule is actually going in binding. That is one is the COX-1 and COX-2. And then you can see this part of it is very, very similar, right? And then we figured out there's an extra, region that could be exploited to make it, to make drugs which are, specific to 1 and 2 separately. And that's how people started making. Okay. So what is it I want to say from, the story of aspirin? The idea is this, that, the drugs have been, we have been using medicine for a very, very long time, right? Thousands of years. So initially, until the, about the mid of 19th century, it's all empirical in the sense that, we did some experiments, it worked, and then we started using. And at some point, we started understanding the drug molecule itself, right? What is it, right? And later, we started understanding the mechanism. So what this also means that the the area of the people who are involved. For example, in this stage, right, most of the industry or all of the industry that was producing drugs were the ones who were producing textile dyes, because they are the ones dealing with chemicals, right? So, drugs or chemicals, so they started jumping in and then started making these drug molecules. But then, of course, what we see is that we started exploring, much wider and deeper, right? We started doing experiments at the organism level, tissue level, cellular level, and at the molecular level, right? And, but, one can ask, if things have advanced so much, right? If things have advanced and we have, like the science is evolved, much more today than even 20 years before and so on. But then the number of drugs that are coming to the market are still very, very, very minuscule, right? We can have a half-hour discussion on that, but we are not going to do that today. But the idea is this. This is how the drug discovery has evolved over years, right? In terms of the techniques we use, in terms of how detailed we go in terms of analysis, and so on. Okay. So this is a busy slide, but I'll go to the next slide, which is reasonably simple. But the idea of, these are, in some sense, if you have to fit everything in one, platform, right? This is a simplified way of representing how a molecule is actually discovered. I'm going to make it simple. So what is a drug discovery process? When you have a disease, right, whether it's oncology related, diabetes or neurodegenerative, any disease, right? What we want is a molecule or a drug molecule that can be marketed, that can be made available in a pharmacy, that people can use to treat or manage that particular disease, right? That's the idea. So how does it work? Basically what you do is you go through the biological mechanisms, right? The pathways involved in that particular disease, whether it's an infection or, non-communicable diseases or anything, we understand the, the pathways and then try to find a target. Basically what I mean is that there are some things going on. It's a complicated network of things that are going on and you would like to stop, let's say, right? So you identify a target point at that, you target that, and then is it possible to stop? Can a small molecule help you stop that one, right? So once you have that, that's when the design happens in terms of what molecule can be used to bind to this target and hence stop those processes. And then, of course, once you have shown that it actually works and, in vitro, in vivo, at animal level, and then you do the clinical trials and if you're successful through this, it comes out as a marketable drug. Of course, the failure of this process is extremely high, right? So the rate of success is slow, and then of course the expense, of course, is very, very high. All right, so let's quickly look at what are the properties that a drug molecule should have, right? We are not talking about something specific, or we are not talking something about something that will apply to every drug that is there. Okay, so it's a general discussion on what happens when a drug, for example, if you take a paracetamol tablet, right? What really happens, right? Why are we doing it? I just would like to identify some properties which I should worry about when I'm doing the drug discovery. So this basically happens. Again, we'll not go into the details, but the idea is the molecule or the drug that is being taken in has to get absorbed from your digestive system, because you're swallowing it to the circulatory system, and then it has to it has to be distributed by the heart after it is dissolved in the blood, and of course something happens in between. That's what we call drug action, and finally it has to be metabolized and it has to be excreted, right? So any drug molecules that we are talking about, a small molecule drugs, right? We are talking about these molecules having at least these 5 different properties, right? There are many. We are not going to worry about it today. What are those 5? 1, it should act. It should actually work. And then when I take this, it should get absorbed, and then it should get distributed. It should be metabolized, and it should be excreted. Okay, so first about drug action. What do you mean by drug action, right? So that's the the star that you had. So basically, when you have chosen a target, let's say a protein molecule, you would like to figure out which molecule can bind to it strongly, right? So how do we do it? So typically what we do is, at least the initial stages, we would start with a really large library of drug-like molecules, and then we evaluate one by one. So, This is where the role of computation comes. So what I'm trying to impress upon now is that this drug discovery process that we talked about, where we do multiple experiments at molecular level, cellular level, tissue level, organ level, and organism level, right? But what is the role of computations, right? So the role of the computations is somewhere in the initial stages where we try to not really identify drug molecules, but really to reject the bad ones so that we have a short listed compounds that can be evaluated using experiments. So what is typically done? We use some kind of physics-based method, right? So we take the protein target, and then we take the drug, not a drug, any molecule in your library, and then you bind them like this, and then you figure out, are they binding at all or not, right? So for that, we use some kind of physics-based methods, and we use that to filter the bad ones away. That's basically what we do, right? But then in the last 5 to 6 years, I should say, a little bit longer, not more than a decade, what people have tried to do is started using different AI algorithms for different stages in the drug discovery cycle. So for example, this I already showed, right? So when I say physics-based methods or some kind of rules-based methods that we use in this cycle, this usually applies somewhere here. I know you're not able to see, I suppose, somewhere here, right? This is where the computations are being, useful, right? And it did contribute, to a larger extent. And for example, the first HIV drug that targeted the protease is credited with, a significant contribution from the computational technologies. Okay, so but what we see in the last few years is that not only in the early stages, but also towards the whole cycle, right? The AI methods have started playing some role. At least we see a lot of potential in terms of how AI methods could be used not only for this restricted region of this whole process, but throughout, starting from, identifying the target or analyzing the biological pathways, all the way to predicting clinical trial outcomes, right? So this, we see significant progress in this particular area. And of course, in the last 5 years or so, there's many startups that come out, and some guy who was actually tracking the startups coming out in the area of AI for drugs, he just gave up, saying it's just exploding exponentially. I just give up. Somewhere he's written here. Okay, so that's also how we see many tech companies, starting to do, exercises very well related to drug discovery. For example, Alphabet, which is the parent company of Google, has its own company called Isomorphic, which does drug discovery. And you can see many companies, there are some very successful ones who have some compounds in clinical trial through AI pipelines, or Exscientia and In Silico Medicine, who we work with, Atomwise, and so on, right? So these are companies, basically AI for drug discovery companies doing extremely well. Okay, this is just list some of the tasks that could be solved using the AI approaches, and it has been shown also. Okay, but the problem is this, because when you look at the drug discovery process, it typically involves researchers from science background, not from technology, right? But we don't like me, for example, right? We don't like AI. Why we don't like AI? We think AI or machine learning models are black boxes, right? Why I don't like black boxes? Because in technology, right, you are looking for solutions that make things work somehow, right? If it works, I'm happy. Nobody is going to ask how it is working, what is in it is making working. But in science, most of the times we are worried about, what makes it work. If something is working, I'm not interested in making it more efficient or better and so on. My interest is only to figure out, what makes it work, right? The curiosity, that's the problem. So, but then again, in the last, as I said, in the last 6 to 7 years, people started using it, like really big. Okay, so when they start using, or why they start using. So first, this is just my categorization of how I understand the area, and then I use these 4 categories just to give 4 different case studies, and I will stop. So people like when the physics-based methods that I mentioned before, right, are inefficient. They take really long time, right? or I have to spend a large amount of compute time, or I have to wait longer, and so on. They are inefficient. Can machine learning algorithms help me make it do faster, right? So the answers are the same, right? But can I do it faster? It doesn't matter if I don't understand, because I know I have already understood a physics way of doing it, but it is slow. Second is, we still don't understand. There are problems, in science that, we have not solved, right? Instead of trying to figure out, how it happens, if we can figure out a way to, make it happen and, provide a solution, and continue worrying about, why it works the way it works, right? So that's the second scenario. We still don't understand, but AI seems to give solutions, which seems very, very good, right? That doesn't stop me from using it. And then the third one is, we do understand it reasonably well, but I don't know how to make an algorithm, or I don't know how to code this particular understanding to a point where I can start using, high throughput. And then finally, what we call inverse problems. I'll talk about it later. How much time do you have? 10 minutes, okay. All right, so the first category, physics-based methods are inefficient, right? So, I'm taking some example. I'll try to keep the technical details down, but just to give some idea of how this happens. So let us, as I said, one of the exercises in the early stages of drug discovery is take a large, drug-like molecule database, and then you screen them. So what do you mean by screen them? Let's say I have this particular library, right? My job is to figure out what are the top ones. What do you mean by top ones? We discussed, I showed about 5 different properties, right? With respect to those 5 different properties, which are all better for a given disease, let us say, right? That's basically what is given in this box. Traditionally, what I should be doing, what I will take is, I'll take this library, take one by one, subject to some process, and then rank them in a certain order based on the quantities that I'm interested in, and then pick the top 10 or 100 or 1,000 or whatever that I'm looking for. That's how I would do it, right? That's what anybody should do it. So now in this case, we have a machine learning model to make it more efficient. So it's exactly the same thing. The exercise is the same thing. Again, please don't worry about the technical details. But the idea is that I have a library, I have a certain condition coming from there, and I would like to choose the top hits. That's the exercise, right? So now what we do is we do some kind of machine learning. In this case, what we do is, we don't, in this case, we start with 0 data. That means I have no data to train with, right? But then you start your evaluations with very small amount of data explicitly generated, and then you try to kind of acquire more compounds which are actually more useful for that particular disease than not. And then basically you keep doing that and return the top ones. So that's basically, what I call you invest less and, reap a large benefit. So basically, traditional way of doing things, if I spend 6% of my effort, I would get 6% returns. That's equivalent to 0.6 here. I get 6% returns. So, this particular method where I said, I try to, some kind of way of picking the molecules, not, systematically or randomly, but, based on certain features and stuff. You can see just by spending the same 6%, I, go up to at least 90%. Okay. Second category of problem. We don't understand the physics set, or we don't understand how it works. I'm sure, quite at least half of you must have heard, which is the protein folding problem, right? As I said, one of the most common targets for any disease are proteins, right? You're designing small molecules which will go and bind to these proteins, okay? But then getting the structure of the proteins is not so easy, right? We have a very small percentage of structures, or we have structures of very small percentage of proteins compared to all of them that exist. And this, of course, again, comes from a technology company called DeepMind. Basically they solved, I wouldn't say they solved it, but they did very, very significant progress in terms of predicting the structure given only the sequence, right? The sequence basically is that you tell what amino acids are part of in that protein, and then it gives this kind of nice, beautiful structures. What do you see, or the blue one is the predicted by the AlphaFold or the ML model, and the green one or the ground truth or the experimental numbers. Of course, this just compares the performance of some of these algorithms. And the third category, we understand, right? I hope, you remember the 4 categories I spoke about. The third one is we understand reasonably well, but I don't know how to make it into a certain set of rules that can be programmed. A simple example is, again, a common problem in drug discovery exercises is to make compounds in lab. For example, if some person who is doing the design comes to the experimental guy and says, oh, this compound may be good. Let's say this compound may be good, right? So immediately what an organic chemist who would actually be making the small molecule is to figure out, how to make it, starting from the chemicals that you can buy off the shelf, right? So he would write something like this. Again, please don't worry about the details. It doesn't matter. I don't even know what is there actually. So basically he would write something like this, where I say that, okay, you buy the first one, you buy this, and then you do certain transformations, and finally you will get it, right? So the expert knows exactly what to do. That what is the task? The task is to make that, right? What is the process? The process is I go to an expert and he comes up with this particular solution saying, okay, this is what you have to buy, and these are the steps you have to follow, and you will get that, right? How do I code this now? Because I have, hundreds of thousands of such schemes, right? Given any molecule, right? How do I come up with this particular sequence? So this is, again, we work on this problem also. It's not a completely solved problem, but we made huge progress. But the idea is that we use the reinforcement learning to figure out, how, given a compound, what is the pathway I should take, or what are the steps I should carry out in my lab, so that I can make this. In the same context, you can think about self-driving laboratories, right? I only tell the laboratory saying, okay, I want some compounds which could possibly be drug or the ligand or good candidates for a certain disease. That's the only instruction I give to the lab. Now, can the lab take over now and then do everything that needs to be done? Test against a certain disease, do whatever biochemical assays or cellular assays, making molecules, and then gives the molecule for further testing, right? That's the direction that people are working on right now. Okay, the final one, like 3 more minutes, what I call inverse problems. What do you mean by inverse problems? Most of the times, right? Whether it is in drug discovery exercises or any experiments that we do, not only in a laboratory and outside anywhere, right? So most of the times what we do is we start from a molecule or a compound and then ask, what is its property? Like we talked about drug action or absorption and so on, right? I start from a molecule and then say, can it get absorbed, right? Can it get distributed? That's the question I ask. So, the other way to ask, or most, more logical way to ask is this. I know exactly what I want. I want a molecule that can get absorbed. I want a molecule that should get metabolized, should act, should get excreted, and so on. Can this go as an input to a method or a model? And then the model gives me the molecules in return, right? So that's basically inverse problems, and physics-based methods. You cannot use physics-based methods to handle this kind of questions, right? So the only way is to use the ML. So it's like, asking question like, I want to make a pizza. What are the steps I should go through? Versus saying, I don't know anything about pizza. I am saying, okay, I'm going to do this step, these steps. And then will I get a pizza back, right? At the end of the exercise, will I get pizza? Obviously not, right? Especially when I don't know anything about pizza. It's the same thing. Okay. I should not go into the details, but we use different algorithms for this particular exercise in terms of generating new molecules. Basically, the Gen AI that we talk about, whether it's ChatGPT or any of the generative AI we talk about, right? So maybe I'll give a simple example. All right, so let's take this one. Again, don't what is plotted here are some properties. Okay, we'll not worry about what those properties are. I only say what I need. What do I need? I want this algorithm to generate new molecules which lie in this region. That means between the 2 blue lines, right? In addition to that, I want molecules which have the minimum value corresponding to this, right? So now can I ask the Gen AI to generate molecules that compresses this distribution to the middle and that one towards the left, right? So that's basically what happens. Now, the AI learns in terms of what I want in terms of the properties, and then it starts generating new molecules. And of course, that what I showed is a simple example, but you can also extend it to complex exercises. And then of course we have also used the GPT architecture to generate new molecules with specific properties of interest. And then we can also show that it can generate molecules. This, for example, the molecules that are shown here, this is generated by a GenAI algorithm that actually fits into a given protein, to make it strong binding and so on. Okay, so I hope I was just able to give some idea, or just the flavor of what we mean by drug discovery process and how computations play a role, and possibly AI is making some inroads into making this process more efficient. Right. So with that, thank you very much. Thanks again for. Okay. All right. Thanks.
Thank you, Deva. Very, very insightful. I'm really, really impressed by how you said, don't worry about this, that, the other, but still be able to convey the essence on each slide. So thank you so much. I was also happy to see that there were some themes that emerged again and again. For example, data sets, for example, human AI kind of interaction. With that, now let's make a huge leap from drug discovery to delivery of care, where drug will be one part, but there will be a lot of other things going on. So Dr. Sujay, please come on the stage. I don't claim to know how this works, so I'll let the experts handle it.
Good evening. Truly a privilege to be here. My sincere thanks to Professor Bhagwan, Professor Ramesh, Professor Sarang. Always a delight to meet you. And a wonderful talk by Professor Deva on the drug discovery and the kind of steps that we go about in taking those. I'm going to take you through a ride, particularly around what we have been doing at Apollo Hospitals on clinical AI and the challenges that we are facing. Because it's important that it's not just about coming and talking to you about AI in healthcare. Many of you already have distinguished perception, if I may put it, to actually see how AI has to be rolled out in healthcare. But I would leave behind with certain questions in your mind to think and to see how do we take this forward and have good dialogue and understanding of what that can be done in future. Well, my background, clinical background, is of a clinical microbiologist and then infectious disease. And it's been a while that I have actually wore a white coat. I've been doing a lot of things with data for the past almost 15 years now. First, it was with quality improvement, and then now more intense on the data side. And I have two of my colleagues on the labs that we run at Apollo Hospitals about how do we go about in using this data in our daily practice, and how do we go about it doing that. Fundamentally, if you look at, there are certain building blocks of design, development, and deployment of clinical AI. And I don't have that slide which actually talks about the 9 steps, but I will talk about those 9 steps. You need to build with an ideation framework in your organization, particularly if you're coming from a healthcare background and a hospital's background, where you bring in your clinical consultants, you bring in your nurses, you bring in your other healthcare workers, sit in a room, look at how you see the current practices, clinical practice guidelines and others, or the literature search, and identify where having an AI tool would augment your work. In many ways, what we see in healthcare is that people throw solutions to problems without understanding the problems. And that is where we would have to do a little bit of re-engineering in identifying at the ideation phase. So when I go back and teach my students at IIM Calcutta on design, which I've been doing it for, for past 8 years, I talk about, look at the elements in ideation in terms of attitude, behavior, expectations, experience, and what you would like to deliver as a proposition for something where you would see a better clinical outcome. So start with ideation. Once you've started with the ideation, the second step is actually to look at, in terms of this 9 yards, is go and look at the data that you have in your organization. And that's very challenging at times because retrieving data is always going to be a bit of challenge in the way that you have been collecting it over the years. How do you go about and see that? And then, you start using different data engineering on top of it. And I'll come back to those solutions in a while. But then, looking at that, the first thing that you need to see is that what is the availability of data within your organization. Now, how do we at Apollo Hospitals, we look at a data? So we have 4 pillars where we club first the transactional data, then we look at the clinical data as such, then we look at the images and the signals that we are getting. So anything that you come from, any kind of images that you would look at, or from perspective of signals like ECG, EEG, EMG, NCVs, and others that you would get. And then interestingly, on the third or the Z-axis, you have something what we call as the data with H3V, high volume, high velocity, and high variability. Now, if you go about and look at the data that is captured in your healthcare on a daily basis, you would see that the maximum challenge comes from your x-axis or the clinical data itself when you are collecting this in the EMR. Because images are electronically captured. All you have to see how they are stored and processed, retrieved, and worked on it. On the high velocity volume and variable data, whether it is a genomic data or a video or others, you need to identify and see how you are capturing, storing, retrieving, and where you are storing in that perspective. And Professor Sarang stated in one of his 5 problems, and I'll take each one of your 5 problems to answer that. And he said, many organizations lose those data because they don't know what to do with it. They don't know where to store this. Imagine the videos that you get from your robotic surgeries or from your coronary angiography labs or cath labs. What do you do with that? They are electronically captured, but possibly you lose them over a period of time. And those repositories are now beginning to bring in a lot of ways by which there are insights to this and insights about your own practice. The third step is about going to your ethics committees. Because, don't take it granted that because you have an idea and you have data, you are able to go about and do whatever you want to do with. You cannot. So you would possibly have to go to your ethics committees because you are looking at retrospective data or even prospective use of algorithms. You would have to go and take an approval from the ethics committees about your intent of research. And in many cases, this is developing at this point of time. You would have to look at the consenting process, and I'll come into the consenting process in a while as to why you require consenting process about data and data use. Because, the primary purpose of a patient when he or she comes to an hospital is to get treated, is to get diagnosed for disease. It is not about giving consent to you to have an access of this data and do whatever you want to do with it. So you have to go about and take explicit consents about how you go about doing that. Once you have the consent, the 4th step is actually go about in building models. And Professor Deva was showing us, many ways of how you go about in doing this. start with very basic systems after you have normalized and de-identified your data, and anonymization is a very, very critical, plays a very, very critical role in that. And you would get, from your perspective, your development cohort and your training cohort and the testing cohort, and you would get some results. And hopefully you will get very, very good results because you are doing in a very controlled cohort. That is when we recommend that you go to your external partners and go about in validating your models with that. So who are your external partners? Your external partners could be any organization within the country, or it can be people across the world. And I'll tell you about, how do you go about in building consortiums across the world using cloud computing, confidential computing, and others to actually build your, entire partner program along with this. The sixth major step is then to go about and talk to the world about your research. And that is where you present it, you go about and publication, peer reviewed and all that. But do not forget, before you do that, you have filed for appropriate patents and your copyrights. IP protection, in particularly in healthcare AI. How many of you are startups here or work with startups? It's very critical for all of you to have your IPs looked into when you are going and publicly talking about something, because, at any point of time, particularly if you are following some of the Chinese researchers, you'll see that whatever you could come with, they already have it. And they're very smart. They go about in doing their patent, they protect their IP and move on into that. The seventh step, and that's why I talk about this basic hygiene, is actually to go for your certification. If you are thinking about integrating the API or the algorithm from the API, or the API from the algorithm and use them prospectively. And in that step, you would have to go through the process of software as a medical device 13485, or if you're thinking about doing it in multiple different countries, you see medical device single audit program, or what we call as MDSAP, and move on into that direction. Once these are going on the parallel track, the eighth step is actually to go about and build good interfaces. And what we call as the UI for AI. AI is nothing if you are not giving good UIs for people to actually use it at the front end. And I think many organizations struggle because they don't have a good UI on AI. And the understanding part is something that I will come in very shortly from here on. The ninth step is that you've taken a lot of effort to come where you are. You are having a certified algorithm. You now have something which is validated, peer-reviewed, published in major journals and all that. How are you going to earn money from that? And it's becoming increasingly difficult world over to actually look at your software as medical devices, because it is now going to go through the same pipeline which Professor Deva was showing of the drug research. You would have very similar ways by which you would have to do, research on your on your clinical AI solutions. And the interesting thing is, the moment you go through this 18-month cycle of going through this 9 yards, and you have a product to market, you know that your technology is already redundant. Then how do you go about building certain solutions which can be built faster, and at the same time, you would have at least 3 years of that particular product in the market going by? That's a discussion let's have in the break or just after this. Yeah. Now, in doing so, I think one of the primary things that you would always require, talk about is the responsible clinical AI or responsible AI expert. And I was talking to, I have been working with World Economic Forum for the last 4 years with multiple publications with them. And one of the things that we are focusing on, and they wanted how to build the guidelines for responsible AI. And I said, if you don't build what is called as the pipeline of trust, you don't build clinical AI solutions, which would actually go into the market and do that. Why trust? It's all about, looking at consents. It's looking about considerations. It's looking about privacy and confidentiality. Very clear tenet about anyone is that nothing about me without me. So don't go about in playing with my data unless you have taken explicit consent about what you are going to do with it, whether it is a genomic data or whether it is an image or whether it is your data from your wearables or whether it is your data that is coming out from your EMR. Okay, now you have a solution in your hand and you want to roll this out in your hospital. And you will be faced with this at many of these junctures where you have a wonderful solution which diagnoses or predicts or recommends certain treatment. What would you do with that? You take it to a doctor and the doctor says, I don't need it. I don't believe in it, right? I do not know how it will work. And we are seeing this on a regular basis, even on the best products that we have been able to build or validate it across the world. We have found out that there are reasonable skepticism among doctors to adopt to this technology because they do not know what will happen to the patient, what would the outcomes would be, and therefore they are apprehensive of practical accuracy. I'll tell you why, and one of the components of this is the way the AI systems are built across the world, the data that has been collected are in many ways biased. Biased because of temporal perspective, biased because of geographical perspective, biased because of which machines you have used while taking those data. So ECGs from one machine versus ECGs of the other machine at the same time for the same patient may give you varying results. Which one to take? Which one to accept? And then when you go about in taking your models across the world, how do you go about in looking at ethnic variations or geographical variations? And how do you bring into that? Well, we found out ways. Some of them are what we call as the equalized odds or some ways to actually see how you can tally this between different groups and build models into that works. But it is always important that you begin the conversation at the doctor's chamber and see what that you can bring along with that. I want to now bring in the aspects of generative AI. And we see some wonderful products in generative AI in something like voice to text, text to generation of voice and bringing conversational AI. I would like to invite all of you to see one of the things that we've built at Apollo is that Apollo 24/7 platform where you go about and looking at the symptom checker. And Professor Sarang was talking about human-to-human interactions when they were doing it physically. We're seeing now more of these in a virtual environment as well. And just to give you some figures, 25% of our usage of these virtual consults, or even for that matter, going into the symptom checker, starts at 9 p.m. at night and ends at 6 a.m. in the morning. So there are people who are seeking care, who knows that they will not be able to go and see a doctor at that point of time, are seeking virtual care between that time. And go about and look at that. That's one of the symptom checker and CDSS that we have built on the top of it and looked at it. So we've been working on natural language processing and with the data for the past few years on the generative AI. So what we do with the data. So before that, I've given you the three-dimensional model of the data maturity in terms of x-axis in the EMR, y being your the images data, and the Z being your high velocity, high volume, high variable data, including the genomics and others. On that, you would have now longitudinal patients records and bring in the time as your fourth dimension. And on the time with the fourth dimension and along with that, the outcomes data, you can now build anything that you want to build on non-communicable disease, looking at the pathway of the diseases, looking at the velocity of deterioration, because these velocities are not as fast. It's not like the infectious disease where in a sepsis, a patient, deteriorates over a period of 24 hours. It is something that would be there over 24 weeks or 24 months, or could be in 24 years. How do you then identify the velocity of those diseases and then put them into algorithms perspective in that way? And when you begin to look at the different interactions of patients at the hospital with their limited outcomes that they come at each one of these pathway, you build a stack of data set that are there for a particular disease condition, that are there for particular specialty, and then start looking at cross-sectionally on them and say, I want to very specifically focus on a lab marker like NT-proBNP for heart failure. I want to look at a specific medication for that particular things and see how this medication would work. Or I just want to see for the same heart failure, what has been the 2D echocardiography results and the ejection fractions of the patient, or the genomics, which would actually accentuate a particular person's heart failure, whether it is reduced heart failure or heart failure with reduced ejection fractions and all that. Now, to do all of these, there are certain steps which you need to take from a generative AI perspective if you're building one. First, look at your anonymization protocols in your organization. How do you go about in de-identifying your data? The next thing that you need to look at is named entity recognition. You were showing as the K-means clustering and others. We now have a technology called DISCAN, where you can run a named entity recognition or a particular node in a large data set of about close to 1 trillion data points in a graph. And in our labs, we are just about starting on the work on that. We already had an NER program, but we are now building this with more on DISCANs and systems like this. Now, if you've identified a node, you would like to see a node just like the lady had cuffed. You put her on a cuff and see what is the relation between cough and fever with pneumonia in the same graph. And what is the relationship with that, with pneumonia, with increased WBC count and consolidation in the chest X-ray. In that 1 trillion database, you possibly are going to find all of them, and you are going to link them and what we call as the process of disambiguation. Once you've found the disambiguation, the next area that you need to look at is the sentiment analysis or the assertion. And in assertion, what you need to go about in doing it is to identify if you are saying that severe cough with not so severe cough with expectoration, cough without expectorations. You are identifying those keywords in your textual data, right? Which you may think I never go about in teaching my students about structured or unstructured data, because I believe for very strong reason, everything which is not supporting your models is unstructured. So you have to go through your process of normalization. You have to go cleaning your data for the way that you would run the models on top of it. Now, once you have that particular thing, or pain, where you say somebody says severe pain and not so severe pain, how do you go about in looking at that? So we have found out ways to actually identify that, quantify this, and then put this into the nodes. Once you've got that, you can then do relation extractions and identify what is the coefficients between cough with pneumonia, pneumonia with consolidation, consolidation with your increase in WBC count. And add time factor to it, and 5 days with your antibiotic therapy, you're now beginning to look at what improved, how improved, and why improved. And you can ask questions to your data set about this, which is very specifically what you are talking in terms of question answers. We are seeing this more and more as we build these or help build. So we work both with Microsoft and Google in terms of curating and bringing in authoritative sources, particularly some of their recent technologies like RAG, retrieval augmented generation, where you have to bring in curated and authoritative sources of data. What is an authoritative source of data? I asked this to one of the top researchers of Microsoft across the wall, and I got an answer which I didn't like. He said, it's about how many times you click in the Bing. In healthcare, we have to move a little bit deeper and understand it from the, in the way we are looking at. Professor Sarang, you talked about human and machines. Yeah, you talked about human and machines. And the reason the doctors do not take into a lot of these is because of fear of autonomy loss, and that they will possibly lose their decision-making authority, leading to a loss of control of patients' care, and therefore in that way. How do we then go about in building better ways by which there is a handoff between machines and doctors, or AI and doctors or clinicians at the time? What if AI suggests or recommends completely different perspective? Would you go ahead and go and treat the patient in that way, or would you not? And what are those? So that's what we are studying in our research at this point of time, and use counterfactual theories to actually see, if you would have taken those decisions, what that would have come over a period of time. I want to go about it. This is something which we published a few, 15 months back. Happy to share this with you. So at Apollo, for the responsible AI perspective, we build an algorithm, or we build a framework called EASE, where we bring in ethical consideration, adoption, suitability, and explainability. And I think many of these are some things that I have already spoken about, but I want to just go and very specifically talk about explainability a bit, in which what we are looking at is a pipeline of trust that goes from the algorithm to the doctor to the patient. And that's why we talk about verifying with decisions, building trust in systems, and then bringing counterfactual reasoning and new clinical insights. I always talk about this pipeline of trust because this is foundational from the perspective of any structural changes that we're going to bring in regulation, workforce and roles, health systems and infrastructure, collaborations and model of care, educations and skill, and then, of course, economic business model that you are doing. But in each of your organization, and nationally as well, or internationally, it is very important how do you go about in balancing between governance and innovation framework. We cannot stifle innovation, but we cannot run AI systems go berserk. And you have today something which your flights are stopped, your banks are not working, and your stock markets are getting crashed because there is no activity that is happening because of so small update that has just happened across one of the Microsoft vendors. Yes, I'm in just 5 minutes and I'll just quickly wrap it up. What do you see when you integrate this to workflows? And I talk about 5+1 pillars of excellence, and the 5+1 pillars of excellence at this point of time includes how do you make an operational backbone strategy? How do you share your insights that are coming from your AI adoption? How do you build platforms which has equitable usage on every perspective? How do you balance in your organization about autonomy versus alignment? What do you do to actually put in the fifth perspective, which is about bringing third-party apps into that? And I bring this on the sixth perspective, which is from Clayton Christensen, professor at Harvard Business School. And he talked about, modularity versus interdependence. These are some of the things that we need to think through as we move on. We now have 6 different streams on we work: conversational AI, disease progression models. We work on image and signals, possibly every image that you can think of. We work on augmented pathways with AI. And then, of course, we work on throughput optimization, and also on the work that we are doing on genomics. This is the work on disease progression models. We now have models for identifying cardiovascular diseases, liver fibrosis, which is now been taken up by Siemens, COPD, prediabetes, CKD, which is now going under the radar for the American Heart Association publication. And then, of course, we're working with Fitbit and others to actually also work on this same throughput optimization. And you talked about how do we go about enrolling this out in the hospital. And for us, it is very important to see capacity constraints, versatility of resources, flow optimization, flow dynamics, and all this. This is something from my classroom at IIT Kharagpur about, how do we go about in, putting operational dynamics, flow dynamics for a patient moving through different parts of the wards, and how do we go about in predicting which ward would have what. My last slide. To do all of this work, I talked about you need to build external consortiums. And external data consortiums are absolute essential for clinical AI, whether it is in design, development, or validations perspective. And these consortiums are very difficult to build. So we have now 32 consortiums that we are working with, including the big tech companies, engineering companies, and more than that, the hospitals, whether it is NHS hospitals of Cambridge or Leicester or Imperial College or Karolinska or Maastricht or Monash down south in Australia. We have been able to build those consortium with the standards of federated learning, confidential computing, and then learning whatever we could do in our setting and going and replicating it to others and seeing and fine tuning. My last slide about this is that the way forward is how do you go about in validating, calibrating, and curating your clinical AI for practical use on the ground. Thank you very much. Sorry, I took a little bit more.
Thank you, Dr. Sujoy. A lot of ground covered in a short span of time. I'm sure there'll be more conversations afterwards over coffee and refreshments. Can I ask Professor Deva to come on stage as well? Let's do a bit of Q&A. Yeah, a few quick questions, top of the mind thoughts, anything that's going to stop the world from running other than the Microsoft Surface. Let's not discuss that. Come. Okay. Yes, Ramesh. Always.
The data, how does one get
Yeah.
How does one get access to all the wonderful data that you refer to that you want to have? When you look at the academic institution side, we don't know how to get it, and we have many institutions. It's not that we can't get a meeting with Apollo without much difficulty. We can get time from Apollo, but somehow we don't know the pathways to get the data. How do we get access to the data for research and innovation purposes?
Fantastic question. And so the answer to this question is, and you rightly put it as a perspective of data access rather than data sharing, because of the nuances of the new DPDP law, and then the rules coming out, and also for the organizational ways that we have been looking at. So what we need is, as I said, in the phase of ideation, just like we have clinical consultants, we can have you to come on board, have an incubation within the organization, identify what data you require, go to the ethics committee, take an approval. And I have my colleague Bharat sitting over here. One of the things that Bharat has very clearly done within our ecosystem, Bharat, by the way, is a student of ISV. So he would be really interested to take this forward. What we do is this then, post ethics committee permission, we provide you access to Apollo Azure tenant where we host the data that you want, and whichever modality you want. And then you can go about in computing and getting your results of that. And we have built now confidential computing chambers and anti-rooms where you can do this in a completely canonical fashion. We don't get to see your model. You don't get to see our data, but you can then go about in computing and getting the results as good as that. So that's some work that we have been doing with your neighbor here at Microsoft, and build this out. We call it Clean Room. and we can definitely provide you the access to any data that you require.
Thank you, Sujay. So those who are in the room and doing some startup stuff with data science and or looking for data, maybe that's very useful. Other questions? Yes, here in the first row.
A follow-up question to Ramesh. Like very nice presentation, Professor Deva and Dr. Sujay. Like, how do you see the data privacy laws in India as compared to Europe and US? Because these data consortiums will require some certain standards and the regulatory framework that exists in India as compared to healthcare.
Yeah, I mean, the best way to do this work, because no data privacy law talks about preventing you from doing this research. All they say is that there has to be a governance model which would say how you go about in doing that. And for us, what we have, because we work with so many partners across the world, it becomes imperative for us to then take certain standards which are global and which are the best in class for that. So whether it is about the high trust security perspective, or whether you are looking at it from the privacy perspective, or confidential computing, federated learning perspective. And that's the research with them, with the Microsoft, because we want to be 2 steps ahead of how do we go about in data access to individuals who want to do research on our platform or our Apollo Azure tenant and do that. Now, coming back to your question about, how do you see them evolving? I think they are definitely on the right track, not because I have been one of the person who have given some inputs on that, but because of the fact that I think that many of them are mirroring the concerns that are there worldwide. And I think in a very subtle way, the Indian Act or DPDP Act captures that particular perspective, including, the laws about violations and all of that as well. But what would be very interesting is in coming weeks when the rules comes out, that's where you go into the brass tacks of it and say, what these laws actually mean.
Yeah, lady in the back. We'll get the mic. We'll get the mic to you. Hold on. Here.
Iftikhar, what do you think about the evolution of generative AI versus intuition and experience? Can you start in context?
You want to take that?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so
Yeah, it's working. It's working.
it's on, okay. Yeah, so see, the idea of generative AI is that it captures all the, the knowledge that is already exists, the intuitions and everything, right? So that's the, the generative AI has to be good enough to capture all this, right? Of course, today, in many ways, the Gen AI is still, has problems, because of this, when we talk about NLP, we talk about hallucinations, for example, right? There are problems, but the idea of generative AI is that it captures all of this, or we want it to capture all of this, but it's not there yet for sure. But
yeah, if you remember what I showed in that slide, I talked about a little bit of curation and also doing it from an authoritative sources. It is very important that certain, particularly in healthcare and people reaching to those, whether it is an OpenAI or any of the other ones, people or MedGemini for that matter, people reaching out to them and asking for their healthcare solutions in a much more deeper depth way. And therefore, it is imperative that you have fantastic technology from the foundational model perspective. But everything you ask on a foundational model, but because the data it fetches from, all of these may be biased and may be absolutely rubbish in terms of what you see in contextual hallucination and all of that. So the approach that Google takes today is to say, okay, we do have the MedGemini. We have built it on so much of healthcare data, but we want to bring it to you in order to curate it and get it in a way so that we pass on the right information is the way forward. That's where it looks at your intuition and all of that. There's another conversation that we can have about how do you go about and put this in the terms of clinical pathways, but that's offline.
Okay, I think Gentleman in white shirt and then the black shirt, that order.
Am I audible?
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the nice presentation. The question I have is on the EMR side. So a lot of this data is available in the EMR and we can do a lot of predictive analysis, like what we see in the West Hospital, like some EMRs like Cerner, Epic, what we know. But in India, where we are, like, what is a kind of a hindrance? Why don't we take this approach? Because that's really very good. And Apollo can actually lead, because you do have a EMR, but I don't see the reporting perspective. Like, you have the historical data of the patient and you can do a lot of predictive analysis in EMR itself.
Yeah, I mean, I would put this answer to what I answered here, because if you just get the access to the normalized curated data sets that we have, and we have quite considerable amount to build solutions, you would see the way we have looked at all of these components. And that's why we have moved now to a data maturity model. I don't know whether you know about OMOP or not. So moving from FHIR compliances or HL7 compliances, we are now moving to the OMOP standards, where we're looking at the outcome for a particular clinical conditions much more in a much more higher importance. And to actually see this, how that you can go about in doing this. Today, we work with University of Cambridge, MIT, we work with Imperial College, we work with Duke, we work with several institutions of the world at the moment. And the kind of response that we are getting on the EMR that we have at this point of time is that it gives you better models than what they have seen in the Western or US hospitals for that matter.
So Jay, sorry, I just want to rephrase the question slightly to say, how far are we when I meet a doctor at Apollo for a consultation, and what the doctor does is augmented by the AI engines that use your EMR data?
Oh, okay.
Is that okay? Is that, yeah?
That was my following up question. Thank you for
Yeah.
predicting that in
So how far are we? Like, it's going to happen in 3 months, 1 year, 2 years?
No. So there are several ways by which we are fetching the contemporary patient's clinical conditions, whether it is the labs, whether it is the previous discharge summaries, whether it is about the previous interactions or the prescriptions that the patient have had, and populate it in a way so that it is in front of the clinicians when he is making this decision. For all of these, you would have to understand that there is a maturity that goes on about what we are including at what point and which organization or which hospitals have it. We are in the process at this point of time. And I think by 6 months, you will see this ubiquitous within our systems at this time. But at least at that point of time, at the virtual consults, you can fetch any records you want to do. And in hospitals in Chennai, Bhubaneswar, and this week in Bangalore, possibly you can get it just as it like this.
Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you, Doctor.
Gentleman here in the black shirt.
Hello, can you hear me? Yeah. Hi, Dr. Sujoy, and thanks, Prof. Deva, for the amazing session. One question I have, that you mentioned, like, a lot of doctors may be apprehensive on practical accuracy of AI implementation, and that's a big challenge. Do you think like medical education also has a big role to play in this? Because like in medical colleges, it hasn't been taught, like, not anything about AI and data. And that's one of the reasons that doctors are apprehensive on adopting these.
Absolutely.
So then, like,
that's a very, very good point. Skilling and training people about using AI in healthcare, training them and then understanding the implications of it and how do you go about in interpreting some of these results are very, very crucial in a rightful adoption. And we have had this, you saw in one of our slides, we talked about 2 million API calls that we have had, 2 million people who have taken the AI risk-based course and the disease progression models. It didn't come easy. It took us 5 years to get here. So it had to be a continuous nudge, go sit with the doctor, put appropriate disclaimers, bring the appropriate CDSS tools to actually look at, what they are thinking about it, and then go about in doing the rightful interpretation on that. So it's a continuous improvement or continuous education that you need, reskilling at times, and also looking at the way that they use and give them the feedback. Take the feedback from them and also give them the feedback about their use.
Right. One more follow-up question.
Can
is,
I,
do
in
you
the
think
interest of time, can I
just add
moderate and
something?
say follow-up questions afterwards? if
Can I
that's
just quickly
okay?
add something?
Because I
to-
have free hands.
Can I quickly add?
Okay, Deva, you can add.
So the skill, right? So, just as an information to who interested, we are actually floating a new course on the modern AI for clinicians in collaboration with the National Academy of Medical Sciences. We know this responsible for that. So that's meant for clinicians. Yeah.
I really apologize, just in the interest of time. Because you've got the mic, go ahead. And after that, we've got the person in the back and then there. Two next. Okay.
So, Dr. Sujay, one of the major challenges in any healthcare setup is making doctors use the structured data, right? Getting the coded information recorded. So, with advent of the GenAI, do you think it can play a bigger role? Keep making the doctors, let them express their natural thoughts, and in the back end, this information
Yes.
can be coded. Are you doing anything in that space?
Yes, we do that. And before coming to this meeting, we were having a review of a pretty simplistic code that one of our engineers had built on a natural entity recognition about looking at the clinical terms and then taking them at the back end and codifying them and using them in an appropriate way. We built it and we've made it an open source. And till now, we have 780,000 people who have downloaded this. So this was downloaded 780,000 times, 7.8 lakhs in a span of 4 months. So we have that solution. Yes.
Thank you.
Okay. Yes.
Yeah. Hi, I'm Khaja here. So I have a question with keeping confidential computing in focus.
Can you raise your hand? Oh, yes. Sorry.
Hi. So keeping confidential computing into the focus, how data transparency can be implemented into healthcare?
Data transparency.
Transparency.
Okay. Can you explain what is data transparency? Because
Data transparency meant by when we have a patient reports holding within a hospital. So when the patient has been moved to another hospital, in
okay.
such things, keeping the confidential computing into the focus,
yes,
how the data transparency can be maintained with the into the grassroots.
Okay, that's a brilliant question. And we did this, Professor, and you know about this. We did this with Niti Aayog about 5 years back. This was on a blockchain, proof of concept, where we wanted to look at, how we would be able to push and pull data from a particular cloud server, and then, go about integrating with different hospitals and saying, who can pull the information about for that particular patient and then use it, and then again push it back, saying, I have added these values and all that. It ended up giving a recommendation. And the recommendation is, what is it in for me to put all those information down? And I think we are still there in the last 5 years, because we have not, as a country, we have not decided what is it in for the healthcare organization, what is it in for the individual doctors to push and pull that data and to see how it is. We know how important it is. There's no doubt about it. But the modality of how we are going to do this, whether you use blockchain, whether you use confidential computing, whether you use other canonical systems, is something which is something that, people at the leadership have to still figure it out. But yes, it will come someday.
Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks, Dr. Sujay and Dr. Deva. It was a very amazing presentation, actually. What I wanted to, I'm Judish Raj. I belong to iHub Data IIIT. So my organization is not an hospital or that sort of atmosphere like. but we are doing work something like on finding the like brain infarction studies using AI models. Now, if what I have developed, like where do I validate that?
So this is something that we get often as a question. So again, certain models which have been developed outside, the way is reach out to us. We go through, identify the right clinical person for the first-hand validation for this. And then we go to the ethics committee, because we are going to use the data, anonymized data. The person sitting, can you raise your hand, please, Bharat, and identify yourself? This is the person who actually then would provide you with the access to the data after the ethics committee has been given, permission has been given, and then we will host this into Azure tenant, Apollo Azure tenant, giving you access to actually, go about and validating your solution. What we would need from you is a little understanding and data dictionary and definition of your data elements that you are using in your model. Once you provide us with that and we take it to the ethics committee, get an approval, you know the process to go about. So essentially what we're doing is we're not sharing data or transferring the data to you. What we are doing is we are hosting this on the cloud and giving you access to do the computing on top of it and get whatever results you want to do. And we are making this whole thing readily available as a platform, working with Microsoft.
Okay. I have a question for Deva, just trying to connect the two pieces. So you talked about drug development, right? And how AI is helping there. In terms of post-market surveillance, right? Because we often hear that the drug worked well in clinical trials, and you talked about the Vioxx example. And something's happened after the product is launched. Is there anything that's happening in that space, either in direct surveillance using AI methods or using post-market surveillance data to inform drug design? And if nothing, then it's just a wild question I had, but you can talk about it.
The second one, no. But the first one, it's not really AI being used to do the surveillance, but the data that comes, through, whatever data, especially, I don't think we have the mechanism here to collect that kind of data, but especially in the US where, when it is prescribed, the medical history is tracked, especially for the drugs that are, the new and so on. And then all the health reports come in and then we do pattern recognition on that. That does happen, but I don't think there is any active example of showing that, being used back to, do further development now.
So Professor Sarang, if I can just intrude on this. The second answer can be yes on the data set that we are preparing with the, the drugs that have been used and their outcomes. So we need to talk.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, fair. I mean, people have to report adverse events first, which is itself a problem, but yeah. All right. Okay, I don't see any hands up. So thank you for being a very active and participant crowd. Thank you so much. I will invite Professor Bhagwan. Yeah. Done? All right. So I'll hand it over to Ramesh and team to take over from here. Thank you.
Thank you, Deva.
Yeah, and thank you to our excellent speakers again, patiently answering all the questions. Thank you so much.
And of course, thanks to Professor Sarang for curating this edition, and of course, Professor Bhagwan. He'll come back up in just a bit. I'll just take 1 minute, or not even a minute, 30 seconds to introduce like I told in the beginning, we said we'll just summarize the talks, won't be easy, into short features, and then have few other features that, along with Professor Sarang, we have helped curate. So these will be the topics that will go into this month's edition, which will come out on the 1st of each month, 1st of August. This month's edition will come in 1st of August. And so just want to share that, that the dispatch would go out on 1st of August with those topics. So with that, I'll hand it back.
Thank you so much, Professor Ramesh. Now, as we are approaching to the end of this event, I'll call Professor Bhagwan Chaudhary, Professor of Finance and Faculty Director at iVenture at ISB. Prof.
Thank you all for this great session. So let me thank Sarang for curating this, Dr. Sujoy and Dr. Professor Deva. I'm not thanking Ramesh because he put me on a steering committee and I have to do all this work. So no thanks to you. I'm here to also represent iVenture at ISB, which is everything to do with startups. So I'm going to invite you all for high tea on the atrium, where you will see a whole bunch of 12 or 13 of our startups in healthcare, part of this program called iHeal. So please, as you're having a cup of tea and a sandwich, please talk to them and see what they are doing. If you like to stay a little longer, I'll provide you a better drink at where is that? At the Mirror Pool. We also have a dinner where we spent today inviting startups, hospitals, and investors together. People with ideas, people with money, and people with market access. So they spend the whole day talking to each other, and we have a reception where they are mingling with each other. So I'll invite all of you to be there and talk to all three of them together. The last thing I want to do is, many of you are scientists and doctors. You have many ideas, but all of them don't see the light of day in terms of commercial. We are starting a new program called iVenture Immersive, where we are taking first-time entrepreneurs. They'll spend 6 months on campus taking an idea and making it into a product. And if they are successful in creating an idea, at the end of 6 months, we are going to give them 40 lakhs to take that and actually build something from it. So if you know somebody who fits this program, ask them to apply. The program starts in October. The admissions are on. I am going to just play a 2-minute video of this, and then we will stop from here, and I'll invite you all to come and be on the atrium. So if you can play the video, thank you all again for being here.
Over the years, the Indian School of Business has actively fostered entrepreneurship. We recently established iVenture at ISB, and that has energized our commitment to nurturing entrepreneurial talent. Today, India ranks as the 3rd largest startup ecosystem in the world and is experiencing unprecedented growth. Driven by Government of India's encouragement and support, a growing number of venture capitalists, and a rising culture of innovation, we are poised to disrupt the next wave of entrepreneurial innovation. As India's entrepreneurship landscape flourishes, we anticipate a surge of entrepreneurs. Women and men, young and old, from big and small cities, are starting up, creating jobs and contributing to the economy. But starting up comes with its share of challenges and risks, and that's why ISB is stepping in. Introducing Ivy, iVenture Immersive, a world-class entrepreneurship program where vision meets venture in an experiential, intense, transformative, 6-month, full-time, on-campus experience at ISB. Ivy is more than an incubator. It's more than a school. This is a safe place for first-time entrepreneurs to test their ideas and build a viable venture. This is not an MBA program. You don't need to take a CAT or a GMAT exam. You don't need to be a math genius or an English orator. You don't even need a college degree. all you need is a passion to excel and solve a problem with commitment and innovation. You need fire in the belly. Ivy will connect you to ISB's global alumni, 16,000 of them in 60 different countries. Top VCs, experienced founders, and esteemed faculty. We will delve into a curriculum that of course covers the basics: accounting, finance, marketing, negotiations, AI and data analysis, but will go way beyond the basics with real-world case studies taught by experienced practitioners. Our mission? To equip first-time entrepreneurs with the skills and mindset needed to thrive in today's dynamic business landscape. Join us on this journey of innovation and entrepreneurship. The future of startups begins with Ivy, and ISB is proud to lead the way.
So if you know somebody who has the fire in the belly, as Professor said in the video, or maybe if you are somebody who has that, then definitely scan this QR code. It will take you to the page of the IVI program. And yeah, that's something that should be shared. And yes, looking forward. Thank you so much, everyone.